Hey, are you ready for a super awesome, super amazing Dead by Daylight video? You won't find slop here because this is a super Dead by Daylight video extravaganza. Move out of the way, Oddstar, move out of the way, hens, because this is going to be the best Dead by Daylight video of absolutely all of the times. Prepare to have your mind completely blown away by the most riveting Dead by Daylight content that you have ever seen. No Dead by Daylight video has ever been so edited, so crisp, so undeniably enjoyable and interesting in the history of the entire world. Up until this point, anyways, prepare to have your mind absolutely blown by the most amazing video you will ever see. This is the amaziest, most awesome video to ever happen in the history of forever. Yeah, it's coming to you right here from the
Yeah, I think I'm gonna come back later when whatever this is over. People watch this guy. Hi guys, Brain here, and welcome to another commentary video. Hasn't been too long since I've made the last one, but I love making content for you and you like watching it, so here we are. Sometimes that's all content needs to be. Wink. This time we're going to be talking about the controversial Haste and Hindered stacking changes, where both of these status effects are going to be no longer able to be stacked on either the killer or survivor side of the game. This has been a pretty divisive change, since for a while this has been a good way to introduce build variety into the game for both sides, and some people like the opportunity it creates by having behavior a little bit more wiggle room for designing their perks, while others seem to lament the lack of creativity that will exist after this change and in specific interaction with killers, add-ons, etc. And honestly, a lot of those killers that are affected by this aren't even that amazing to begin with, so taking away some of their stuff probably isn't the best idea. But yeah, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. Let's go ahead and get started with the controversial Haste and Hindered stacking change. I think the way I want to end up going about this video is doing positives, negatives, and then solutions, because this is kind of a really tricky situation, because there are a lot of good positives to this change. There's a lot of very bad negatives to this change as well, which is why so many people can't agree on it. And then we can talk about solutions that would maybe meet halfway or be a better solution overall. So let's go ahead and get started with the positives. The first, and it's one of those reasons that when I first heard this change, I didn't necessarily be like, oh, that's awful, is that perk design can be far more flexible and strong in the future. Often when behavior is going out of their way to design new perks, they have to be careful about which one of these perks will combine with another one of these perks and create a very nasty, awful, overpowered situation for one side or the other. I'm sure the most notable example of this that has ever happened has been Made for This Hope, back in the day when Made for This only activated off of injury states, which is such a lenient activation state that is almost guaranteed every single game unless you're a complete rat. So essentially it was very, very easy to suddenly just proc this very, very OP combo of Made for This and Hope, because not only did you have Hope most of the game at 3% just for an injury, but even if you made it to the end game, which you probably did if you're running all those overpowered perks, now you would have the extra speed from Hope on top of it, and you would be almost as fast as the killer in some instances, which is frankly kind of terrifying. But now, if behavior just makes it to where these effects don't stack, they never have to worry about potentially creating a situation like that again in the game, and can just make haste effects or hindered effects as strong as they want and not have to worry about what's coming next in terms of very OP meta combos. This will make perk variety potentially actually better, since I will not need multiple perks to make one thing go burr. I think one of the things I've noticed about speed builds or hindered builds is honestly it usually takes a combination of an add-on and then 2 or 3 perks to really get your build going, and I see some people devote 4 whole perks to a single task of gaining haste or getting hindered, and I think that's just that's a lot of commitment just to get one status effect to work well. If we go this route where they don't stack, behavior can just adjust these perks to individually be that powerful and be that strong, which they've already done to some of them. That way you can run one perk by itself and enjoy the effect of haste in the game of Dead by Daylight without having to make a complicated build that takes up so many slots. And you can make a more well-rounded build as a result by only having to slot, maybe machine learning, if you want a little bit of haste in your build. I think another thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, especially by Dead by Daylight content creators, because Dead by Daylight content creators often have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, have everybody leveled up. The problem being is that content creators don't really know what it's like to really be a new player in the game anymore. And I've watched plenty of streams where somebody in their first 100 hours of play will see somebody speed up through haste or get hindered from a killer effect or a perk or an add-on and not know what's going on and accuse the other side of hacking. They generally just don't know what's going on. And there's probably going to be some eagle-eyed viewers in the YouTube down below. They're like, actually, it explains the status effects in the tutorial section. No, it doesn't. It's in the tutorial manual that is in the game. The tutorial itself does not teach you how these things work at all. It just expects you to read that very long status effect does this does that does this menu that they have there, which even if it were a community that was not specifically a Dead by Daylight community, it's honestly asking a lot for somebody to go through all of those status effects and different symbols and what they mean, that section, and going through every single one of those and mastering the knowledge of all of those. That is a lot. And I never did stuff like that. I just watched a lot of streamers to learn the game. Like I did not go reading down the wiki and alternative sources that also read that. So TLDR is, it just is not realistic to expect new players to go through all of that, and they often go into their games wanting to play as quick as possible, and then they run into something weird like Haste or Hindered, don't really know what it does, and then they just kind of like panic and freak out and assume cheating, or that they can do nothing about the situation. Which obviously, if the haste cannot stack to some extreme form that looks like cheating, obviously it's just not an issue anymore, right? Obviously the elephant in the room here is DBD is bad at explaining its own game, and built-in tutorials are kind of bad, but it's still a positive nonetheless. Now we get to the part that a lot of you are probably waiting for, the negatives, and we're going to get right into it here. The biggest one, probably the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to the changes, is that certain characters like Clown, Freddy, and Singularity rely on Haste and Hindered status effects to do their job as their killer's base kit. So this would lead to them having far less build variety, because it's really fun to load up on Clown and run some haste perks or hindered perks, because it makes your already cool kit feel even more effective, because you're synergizing it with things your character can already do. Stuff like Rapid Brutality on Singularity is also an excellent example of capitalizing on your overclock mode already giving you that speed, and then having even more speed after a hit. That way you can just run up, slipstream on them, keep running at them. It's just a good feeling, and it's just awesome. And at least in the current version of the change that they're trying to implement, you will not be able to stack things with that, making those characters far less effective, which doesn't necessarily affect Singularity nearly as much. But for characters like Clown and Freddy, who are kind of in like BC tier, that affects them way more adversely than does somebody who is already really strong like Singularity. And I think that opens up like my main issue and my main worry that I have with the Haste and Hindered stack changes, is that if this change is not going to be continued to be nourished by behavior, this change will fall off and absolutely become terrible. This needs to be a design philosophy from this step forward, not just a one-off change. If it remains just a one-off change, then yeah, it will be absolutely terrible. There's already some perks that have been adjusted, that have been made better and have been buffed, and actually feel really good on the previous PTB because of their buffs received from this change. But there are so many killer powers, perks, add-ons, things that need to be adjusted in order for this change to make sense. And we've only seen a part of that so far. And if this is all we're getting, this change is going to be awful. This change is going to be terrible. And the optimistic person in me wants to say that, like, yeah, of course they're going to nurture this change. Of course they're not just going to leave it that way. But like, let's take a realistic look at behavior in the year of 2025. There is a lot on their plate for this year. A lot on their plate for this year. They have the big FNAF release, which is probably the main thing they're putting all of their focus into. 2 rounds of huge health updates that they're gearing towards. The regular chapter release cycle that they have to do on top of that. The regular event cycle that they got to do on top of that. I'm worried that they're potentially overloading themselves. And if there's a change that they would forget, realistically, it's going to be the Haste and Hindered stack and trying to balance things around that. That is probably something that will likely just kind of like go in the rearview mirror, and we're not going to see much of it again after this patch, and that worries me very deeply. I think that I have actually seen with these changes that I don't see basically any content creators talking about that I want to bring light to. Does this not kind of just also put perks at contention with each other? Let's take let's take the example that behavior does continue to nurture this change and buffs haste and hitter perks continually until they've all been fairly changed in a way that makes them really good and really helpful. Is the community not just gonna like gravitate naturally to the best one? Let's take the example of batteries included, which is 5% when you're within 12 meters of a completed gen. Play with your food also gives you 5% just for having 1 stack of leaving chase with your obsession. And this can stack up to 3 stacks, meaning you can get up to 15% haste. So if we're not going for like a gimmick build to try and, capitalize on the end game or something like that, why would I ever run batteries included over play with your food in any normal scenario? Play with your food, even if we're using an endgame build, all I can do is just like make sure for the endgame I have all my stacks to play with your food, so I'm just 15% faster, right? Even in this scenario, it doesn't seem like that's realistically the better choice to make. Which you might be saying, oh, well, just buff batteries included then, Bran. That way it's the better perk. But that doesn't really solve the situation, because if batteries included becomes a better perk than play with your food, people are just going to end up running that instead of the other one. And then play with your food just ends up sitting on the shelf doing nothing for a really long time. Of course, it's not like that black and white. There's minor nuance to why would you pick one over the other, but ultimately my point is that people may just seek the best perk possible and run that for whatever the effect is that doesn't stack. They'll just run the best possible in-slot version of whatever effect that gives and just kind of leave the rest of them gathering dust. I think one of the biggest things that people have said about Dead by Daylight, and it's a recent memory of people that have played the game a long time, is that the game is very optimized at this point. So we can't like realistically expect people to want to willingly pick something that's suboptimal just for the sake of it. Also, I kind of briefly brought up this point earlier, but tons and tons and tons of add-ons also just got nerfed. There's plenty of characters in the game of Dead by Daylight that have add-ons that grant the haste status effect. Now, if you're under the effect of another haste status effect, you might as well be, you're not running this other add-on at all, as long as it doesn't have a stronger effect than the thing you're stacking it with, making these add-ons relatively useless and shooting a lot of add-ons across the board for characters for the entire game way down, even if they were helpful before that. This is also another chore that behavior has to now give themselves, is that these add-ons also need to have an eye kept on them. They need to be buffed. All that needs to be happening consistently to these add-ons now. And if you, I don't know if you noticed this, but if you actually looked at the PTB changes, they almost like basically forgot about the whole add-on thing. Like, it's kind of concerning. It kind of feels like this change isn't fully done, because there was like not really any attention given to add-ons when it comes to this haste not stacking situation. So I guess those add-ons are just nerfed across the board now, unless that's intentional. But even if it's intentional, it's not good. So many characters already struggle with add-on variety, so like, why are they just kind of like very hands-off when it comes to the add-on part of this? I frankly don't know. Now we're going to be a little bit constructive and talk about these solutions, things I think they could do to try and alleviate the intensity of how this problem may adversely affect people in a negative way, or just go a different route than entirely. I think one big thing we could do that would address the big elephant in the room is give killers like Clown, like Freddy, like Singularity, a different effect than Haste and Hindered. There's plenty of characters in the game that have like just their movement speed increases, and it has nothing to do with a Haste or Hindered effect. It's actually something completely separate. They actually did went in and adjusted this for certain perks in the game to make them more balanced. Like Urban Evasion, for example, had its just increased movement speed while crouching clause taken away and actually adjusted to be haste. That way people couldn't stack it with other things. You can do the opposite direction with Clown, Freddy, Singularity and make it to where they just do get a movement speed increase during their hindered haste, whatever it happens to be. That way they can run the haste hinder perks that they wanted to run before. They just can't stack multiple perks on it, but they can at least stack things with their power, because that's a big pain point for a lot of people. Alternatively, this could just be added to another long list of things that you now need to do with the haste and hindered change, and just take a look at these killers' powers and try to update them to be slightly more potent, since a lot of the synergetic perks that they had or add-ons that they had to make their perk better are also now worse as a direct result as well. Finally, I saw another suggestion that behavior just implement a hard max stack when it comes to these status effects, that being haste and hindered. That's what they did with the Fire Up Forever Entwine combo when they didn't want people picking up people mega fast that it looked like cheating. They just capped the limit of the pickup speed down to 42% overall. It feels like the far easier balancing decision to just put a cap on this, put a maximum number that they feel is fair and balanced on the speed effects or the hinder effects that they want, instead of having to manually go in and adjust perks, add-ons, killer powers, just adjust all of that and keep up with that for the rest of DBD's life cycle. How do I feel about it personally though? Personally, I was not really fully against this change when I first heard it in the PTB, and I didn't think it was too bad, with the caveat that, hey, if they decided to continue to nurture this change, I think it would make perk design and perk variety better overall in the long run. However, now that I'm sitting here going over all of this and all the things that behavior needs to sit and do and put maintenance on for the rest of the game's life cycle, it just sounds like a massive undertaking to continually upkeep all this stuff. And I worry that they just don't have the ability to give this change the attention that it needs with all they have going on this year and for the rest of DBD's history to continue to do this over and over and over again to all the things that need to be changed. Ultimately, I feel like just deciding to put a cap on Haste and Hindered that they believe is fair would be a far easier solution that they wouldn't have to continually upkeep and nurture for the rest of the foreseeable future. If they want to come back to this change when it feels like it's more fully fleshed out, I'd be open to it. However, in its current state, I just feel like there's just so much missing from this change that would inadvertently affect a lot of players very negatively. So what do you think? Do you think the Haste and Hindered stacking change is bad, or do you think it's actually going to be good in the long run? Let me know down in the comments below. But that's it for today's video, friends. Hopefully I made your day a little bit better today. If I did not, I get the chance to do so again in the next video. If I don't see you in the next video, well, you know the thing I always say. I'll see you when I see you. Goodbye.